So I'd like to introduce Michael O'Connor-Clark, who has joined us today to talk to us about the lunatics have taken over the asylum and how to use social media to build your personal brand. A little bio on Michael. Michael is one of Canada's true social media pioneers. He's been doing this stuff longer than many self-styled social media experts have been even online. He joined his first social network in 1997, started blogging 12 years ago, joined Twitter at launch, and was one of the first 500 users invited to join LinkedIn. He now builds and executes social media programs for a living and has worked with clients as diverse as AOL, H&R Block, PayPal, TELUS, Travelocity, Yorkdale Mall, Rogers, the Ontario government, and Honda Canada. That's a strong list, Michael. Michael is also co-founder of Ho Ho To, which is a huge annual holiday party in aid of the Daily Bread Food Bank. And to his credit, other cities are starting to ask to have their own Ho Ho Calgary, Ho Ho Saskatoon. Ho Ho To belongs to Michael and to us. And he built and promoted this event entirely through social media and has raised over $165,000 to help hungry people in the past 4 years. Michael, over to you.
Thank you.
Well,
good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for the intro. Yeah, it is strange. It's as my bio says, I now do this for a living, which is kind of odd. I'm head of digital and social media at this mid-sized agency, and it's something I entirely fell into. Around about the time I first started in agency work, I had already been experimenting online, playing around with emerging social networks and stuff like that. And I had a whole bunch of friends who were journalists, scribes of one sort or another, because, hey, I was a PR guy. And I remember having lots of conversations, two in particular that will always stick in my mind. When I started blogging, and blogging it was just sort of bubbling up as this new strange thing people were doing. I remember talking to clients about it, talking to my colleagues in the agency about it, and there's like lots of people shaking their heads. But talking to journalists about it was even more strange, because the reaction I would get very often was, why the hell would I ever write and publish something I'm not getting paid for? And strange enough, some of those people who asked me the question, two of them in particular I can think of, now make an enormous amount of money and have got very lucrative book deals out of doing just that, doing the blogging thing. I'll talk about those a little bit more as we go through this morning. When I was picking out the title for the talk, I chose this, The Lunatics Have Taken Over the Asylum, not just because it's a terrific specials song from my youth, but it's kind of how it feels in the media world these days, the kind of interchange, the switching roles of audience and author. So that's going to be one of my themes for the morning. On the subject of themes in general, I can get the beast to work. Thank you. I thought I'd start with a little overture, a little kind of explanation of what I'm going to try and do, and what I'm not going to be able to do. Now, I have been doing this stuff for about 12 years, and as I say, it's now my daily life. I've just finished putting together this enormous, all-encompassing, comprehensive social media strategy for Honda. We manage daily Twitter accounts for a number of clients. I do, I get stuck into kind of monitoring and all sorts. We build Facebook apps. We do all these interesting things. In the time I have available this morning, unfortunately, I can't teach you how to do all of that, nor would you actually want to do all of that. I'm going to try and give you a kind of a context, a framing for how to think about this stuff. And I'm also going to dive deep at a couple of points and share with you some things that I think would be extremely useful in the life of a creator in terms of how you build your personal brand online. So that's kind of the themes, the setup, if you will. But enough preamble. Let's sort of get kick-started here. You've had an introduction to me. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. This is a guy I worked with starting in, I guess, 2005, 2006. One of the sweetest chaps you could ever expect to meet. Terry is a lovely man, former political aide, spent his life in the PR business. Just, utterly charming and friendly and funny, good family guy, plays pickup hockey with his buddies at the weekends. Terry's also, like a lot of people in the PR business, something of a writer and has been tinkering with writing for a long, long time. Some of you in the audience may already know where this story is going, by the way, so just don't tell me. Now, while Terry and I were working together, trying to hack our way through new business pitches and trying to beat a clue into Rogers, who were one of our biggest clients at the time, he was also taking himself off into his attic room every single night and pounding out this book that had been rattling around his head for years. To the point where he got the book written and had reworked it and reworked it and reworked it and was really happy with where it was at, but at the same time was going through that kind of self-doubt. He didn't know if it was actually any good. So, as Terry and I were also experimenting still with social media and blogging and stuff like that, what he did was he created a blog. And this is his first blog post. This is from early 2007. There's a lot of text there, so I don't expect you to read it all. But basically this is Terry, as he says, standing at the edge of the abyss, trying to figure out, what am I going to do to get this book? Now, by the time he started blogging, he had spent a year and a half trying to find an agent, trying to find a publisher, trying to find anybody to take interest in this book. He passed it around amongst a small group of us in the office, and we'd read it and thought it was lovely. But he could not get a deal for it. So he went, you know what the hell, I'm just going to throw it out there. And as he says here, it says, it's tough in this day and age for a first-time novelist to interest an agent, let alone a publisher. So a new approach is in order, and hence this podcast. He decided that what he would do, as he'd spent most of the last couple of years putting the kids to bed and then heading upstairs to his attic to write, well, why not do the same thing, but this time instead of writing, he was going to read the book. And he would just record it in chapters and throw them up there and see what happened. And so he did. He also, as he said here, will likely self-publish it sometime just to get it out there. So this was the self-published version. He paid to have 1,000 copies of the book printed, and he started this podcast. He started recording it and putting it out there. And then he would track round the bookstores in the neighborhood. We worked at Young & Sinclair, and the Coles, or I forget what the bookstore is up there, but they would stock this book because Terry would go in and plead with them to do so, to try and sell through these 1,000 copies. And I bought a copy, and a bunch of friends in the office bought a copy. And then something really interesting happened. So he's got this podcast going. He's got to the point where he's nearly broadcast the entire book. And then he gets nominated for a certain award. And miraculously, according to Terry, he wins. He won the Leacock Award in 2008, which is an enormous, enormous award. Just extraordinary. I mean, he was up against, Paul Quarrington, people like that. And he won somehow. So from that, Terry picks up an agent and he picks up a deal. And McClellan and Stewart published the book and put it out, put some marketing muscle behind it, and Terry got some money. And so he took himself back off to the attic and thought, okay, I can do this. This is kind of, things are happening now. So he writes another book. The second in what is now, I think, going to be a trilogy. So this is trotting along okay, the book's kind of selling all right, the Leacock Award certainly gave it a boost. Then something genuinely mind-blowingly extraordinary happened. And again, some of you probably already heard this story. Terry was picked as the 2011 Candle Reads winner. Ali Dolce defended him nobly and valiantly on CBC Radio, and he won. Terry's book was suddenly the book that Canadians were going to be reading that summer. And that has, as I'm sure many of you know, an enormous impact. Within a very short period of time, there he is. He's the #1 on the Chapters Indigo list. He's top of the charts at Amazon. Not something that Terry would be happy about, but I love the fact that, you know, this not in stock thing, that was up there all the time. They could not keep the book in stock. It was selling so fast. The first book, has now actually been turned, or is about to be turned, into a TV miniseries. There is a 6-part miniseries coming out later this fall. By the way, Terry still has his day job. He still shows up at the offices of Thornley Follis every morning and works as a senior vice president of a PR agency. What the heck? One of my favorite little codas to this story, though, is not even all this stuff. It's this. When they advertise the book online right now, he's keeping some pretty good company. You see Terry's little book put up there against Mordecai Richler. All of this, obviously, is largely due to the fact that it's a superb book. Terry's a great writer. He's a very funny man, and he writes beautifully. But, by his own admission, Terry also says that, you know, in the absence of all the feedback he got around the original podcast, he probably wouldn't have gone ahead and self-published the book. He probably wouldn't have put it out there. In fact, he says, without podcasting, and by extension, actually without the blog, without the other social media activities, it's quite possible that the best laid plans, his book would still be safely secreted in the electronic bowels of his laptop. It was very much a social media success for Terry. A strange story, though. How does this guy, you know, with a book that no agent and no publisher is even remotely interested in, end up winning something like the Leacock Award and then going on through to this stuff? It's a story that I can repeat numerous times. I've got other similar examples, none that I know quite as well as Terry's story, because you know his office was right next to mine. We were in and out of each other's office every single day. But something very bizarre is going on. So let's sort of scrape back the lovely fairy tale story for a moment and talk about how we've got here. I think a lot of it can be traced to the impact of the web kind of achieving its vision. The enabler, in this case, is technology. I'm sure a lot of you probably remember this thing, or some of you will. Back in, actually, just if I go a little step before this, back in 1996, my wife and I were expecting the birth of our first child. And so I was trying to figure out, well, I should do the fatherly things. What should a father do? So one of the things I did was I went and bought a set of Encyclopedia Britannica. I think we've actually opened 2 volumes in the 14 years since my first child was born. A year or so later, not even a year later, I bought this thing, Microsoft Encarta 97. All 12 CDs, this wonderful tome of human knowledge. Encarta and now Britannica, as we now know, have basically been killed as models by this beast. It is the same subject, same content on Wikipedia. What is it that makes Wikipedia so successful and so powerful? I would submit that it's one little thing, and it's this button here, the edit button. Wikipedia is one of the best examples out there of the read-write web. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Again, most of us can remember the early websites. In around the mid to late 90s, websites were basically brochures that had been put online. And you had a browser. Think about even the way this thing is named. It's a browser. You browse websites, you surf the web, you travel from one place to the next and look at things and consume the content. In fact, that wasn't really what Sir Tim had originally had in mind. If you go and read any of the history of how the web was built, it was always designed to be a medium that people could both browse and easily contribute to. The problem was, the technology to do the contribution part was bloody difficult. It was way too complex for mere mortals, until all this wonderful new Web 2.0 technology comes along, until things like blogging and social media and other stuff like that come along, as I will explain in a moment. But it was always meant to be a web you could both read and write. And it's the fact that we're now all able to write to the web, that we can all publish stuff online with incredible ease. That, I think, has made stories like Terry's possible. That's turned things on their ear completely. To be honest, as I was digging up this particular Berners-Lee quote, it struck me that actually it's not really his fault either. There's somebody else who, well, I don't know if it was his fault, but somebody else who saw all this coming a long, long time ago. Now, I'm hoping in this audience, I ask this question quite often, I'm hoping in this audience some of you know who this is. Please tell me, show of hands. Anyone know who this is? Oh, thank goodness. Thank you. I was actually standing in a conference room about 4 weeks ago at the University of Toronto, in Trinity College, and I pulled up a slide with actually not as good a photo. I love this photo of McLuhan. I pulled up a slide with a photo of McLuhan on it, and I said, so, who can tell me who this is? Crickets. In the University of Toronto. This is Trinity. This is... Amongst all the many, many, many extraordinary insights and visions that McLuhan is remembered for, there are also some little buried wonderful nuggets. And there's a piece I came across in a book from 1972 where he said this. Now he talks about electric speeds. This is, before internet communications and stuff like that become common. And he says at electric speeds, i.e. in the future, what will happen is the consumer becomes producer. Consumer becomes producer. It switches roles. The public becomes a participant, not just there to consume the stuff and take it in. We're actually able to produce the stuff and spit it back out. McLuhan is, to many, well, to me at least, the father of social media. I've had the benefit, and this is a little bit of self-importance, I suppose. We did some work with one of McLuhan's daughters, Stephanie McLuhan, a couple of years ago, helping build this site for his centennial, which was last year. And I tried this idea out on her. I said, hey, that your dad basically saw all this social media stuff coming. And she said, oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Completely agrees with me. It's a very nice site, actually. And anybody who's a McLuhan fan, there's this site called MarshallMcLuhanSpeaks.com, which basically was assembled by Stephanie and the family. All these wonderful video clips, archival footage that the family had sequestered away for years, some of which have never seen the light. And there's a terrific Tom Wolfe video introduction to the whole site as well. It's well worth checking out, but not right now. Okay? So we've still got like 2 hours to go. Yeah, so the world has changed. We've got to a point now where we have this read, write, web, where audiences flow fluidly between these different roles. You've probably heard the expression, the people formerly known as the audience. Right, you are all audience today, but you can also all create and contribute. And we flow back and forth. And we can mash up things. We can take a piece of content from here and a piece of content from here and squish it together. It has all sorts of interesting repercussions and applications for copyright. And form communities around shared interests. I want to let that thought hang in the air because it's a theme I'm going to come back to. Finding the community of interest to you or to your work. So, okay, so far, so obvious, right? We know most of this stuff. What I'm sure a lot of people are thinking is okay, yeah, I get that social media is huge. It's out there, it's real, it's not going away. But why do I care? And, can't I just ignore it? Do I actually have to get involved in this? I'm going to try and give you a case for why you should care, why you should think about getting engaged in this stuff.